September 1953. A little-known driver in an unorthodox French car storms around Australia to win the first Redex reliability trial. He's a quietly spoken chemist from the sleepy town of East Maitland, but he drives with rare skill and courage to beat the best drivers in the nation over the longest rally route since the New York to carried 2 fan belts, 2 radiator hoses, and a dozen bottles of beer. The driver's name was Ken Tupman. His car, a Peugeot 203. Together, they win a special place in Australian folklore, for during these 12 days in September, they create He's older now. 3 decades have passed since he left here, at the beginning of that epic drive. But for Ken Tupman, history is about to repeat itself. 30 years later, to the very day, he sets out to retrace the 1953 Redex trial in another Peugeot, the 505 STI. There are no crowds of 250,000 this time. Just Ken and a film crew and memories. Yet this is to be more than a sentimental journey, for the plan is to drive the complete Redex course in the same time it took then, in 1953, to once again pit the Peugeot legend against a land as old as time itself.
We started 96 minutes after the first car, which started around about at 9 o'clock. And the crowd at the actual start was unbelievable. The number of people were there, that they were so ecstatically excited, and all the way through Sydney and all the way up to Newcastle. There were cars everywhere and people everywhere watching this famous rally start.
The 1983 traffic means they're already half an hour behind the Redex pace. Brisbane awaits.
Brisbane, capital city of Queensland. The first man in was Bill McLaughlin, number 6, custom line, nearly 3 hours ahead of his time. As no repair, maintenance or refueling could be done while cars were in control, drivers tried to get to garages ahead of time. Right on time, 9:32 a.m., number 1 enters the control point. The Queensland Sporting Car Club were in charge, and the organisation was meticulous. It had to be. Every minute, early or late, into control was 1 point lost. This Citroen typifies the large entry from continental manufacturers. We're off again, number 150, D. Williams, New South Wales, MG, 9 minutes past 4 in the morning.
"30 years ago, the road out of Brisbane was a nightmare. Cattle grids, sandy creek crossings, potholes, and hardly a sign to guide the Redex cars north through Rockhampton and onto Mackay. But it was kid stuff compared to the first of those famous Redex horror stretches, one the organisers hoped would sort the wheat from the chaff. As Ken Tubman remembers, it was outside Serena.
A mile a bit to Serena by the latest map in there. It doesn't even go long like it used to do.
With the help of local service station owner Cleve Bunderson, he finds it. A godforsaken stretch of road, ironically, now with a 4-lane highway adjacent. This is the track Jellic Knight Jack Murray once said should be fenced off and left to the devil. Cleve Bunderson knows why.
When you did come through, I don't think there would have been one of you left with a muffler on. We could hear you covered for miles. We knew it was on, you know. To be honest, nobody left the old Bruiser Mackay unless they had a full box of vulcanising patches and a vulcanising clamp and a good old pump to pump the tyres up.
Just as he did in the 203, Tubman and his latest Peugeot clean sheet the horror section. Then make the 8-hour run to Townsville in more leisurely fashion than they did in 1953.
This bridge just outside Mackay spans the now dry Pioneer River. Ahead of us, 273 miles to Townsville. Watch the West Australian, H.R. Smith. We're doing 50, so what's he doing? This road had some pretty long, straight stretches, and we jumped out to shoot a few going past at speed. The gears were frozen on this Jaguar. They'd sent for help and were turning round for Sydney. At all times, if parked, you had to keep a wary eye open. The northern run up the coast is nearly over, 1,700 miles from home.
From Townsville, the Redex rerun turned west, away from the lush coastal strip into the blazing red heart of central Queensland. They called this the Calamity Trail. 609 miles of black soil and bull dust, of gibber-strewn, sand-choked ruts and washaways, linking the unmarked emptiness between Townsville and Mount Isa. The local record was 19 hours. The Redex cars were given the impossible task of driving it in 16. This road became a wrecker's yard, strewn with punctured tyres, broken car parts, abandoned luggage. The jump-ups were so sharp you could hang a car across on its bumpers. For 30 Redex crews, the great adventure ended here. Even Jellic Knight Jack Murray fell victim to one of the 40 dry creek beds that lurked unseen in the hours before dawn. He rolled his Plymouth 3 times and had words. The road from Townsville to the Isa is no place for the faint-hearted. This is outback Australia, and little has changed. The road may be sealed, but a freeway it isn't, and other hazards remain. he and his Peugeot 203 triumphed here where others failed. The Redex cars staggered into Mount Isa, suspension bound up with fencing wire and mulga roots, windscreen smashed, drivers exhausted from the strain and the dust and the constant danger. Against the odds, car 48 beat the clock and arrived without loss of points.
I remember it as being very, very rough and very, very windy and up and down into these little creek things which were absolutely disastrous. But when we came into the view of Mount Isa, came to one of these rather deep creek crossings, I sort of got a bit excited and said, right, this bloody car will go anywhere at any time, and I thundered down into this creek rather harder than what I really should have. All of a sudden there's a hell of a crash in the front of the car with gee, what the hell was that? We had thrown a rock up from the bottom, and it had come up and hit the fan belt, and luckily for us, it hit the fan belt and bent the fan blade over so that it was just touching the radiator. Lucky it only just marked it about a quarter-inch deep, which was lucky it wasn't half-inch deep, because otherwise we would have been without a radiator.
From In 1953, Ken Tubman made the run to Darwin in 25 hours, but then took a swim. "30 years on, the scenery's improved. By now, the Redex rerun was big news, and Ken told it like it is. For just like the 203, his 505 had performed faultlessly.
In those 30 years since the first Redex trial, Peugeot technicians have been developing and refining their cars. What's the difference between this one and the one you drove?
Well, Peugeot, as always, have built very, very good cars, and the latest one that we've got now, this 505 STI, is the latest thing, both from the engine point of view and also for the chassis and the suspension, and they've made it like all Peugeots tough, like Australia.
The car's just about brand new, but you were in fact a pretty experienced driver when you went on the first Redex trial 30 years ago. How old were you when you drove the trial? Can you remember that?
Oh, that's 30 years ago. I was only, a baby in the arms. I don't know.
On a steamy morning in Darwin, Peugeot's Australian representative, Alain Pinault, joins Monsieur Tubman and his entourage for the run south through Tennant Creek to Alice Springs. The road has changed since 1953, but the scenery hasn't. Ken revisits the mysterious Devil's Marbles. As he explains, they've been there a long time.
They've been here a lot of years, of course.
That's right. But
400 million or something?
Yes, it was the first time in this place, that's right. And what about the car now? What is different, you know?
Oh, the car is a beautiful car. And we are doing it so easily and in absolute comfort and air conditioning, the whole lot.
Thank
it's
you.
A magnificent car.
And do you regret the 203 and the rally, the Redex?
Oh, no, that was one of the days of my life.
And 30 years later, would you be prepared to come back, I mean, to start again in another rally with another Peugeot?
Oh, yes, of course. Why
Really?
not? Yes, oh, yes, that would be no problem at all.
Daylight, and we're off again. 300 miles to the Alice.
At 8 a.m. on September 8, 1953, the Redex trial arrived in Alice Springs with the Peugeot 203 of Ken Tubman still without a single penalty point. But the next 15 hours, 10 minutes were tested to the limit. So too the 505 STI. For this awful 900 kilometres that some jester called the Stuart Highway remains exactly as it was 30 years ago. All the way to Kingunya, it's a nightmare of corrugations, gibber planes, rocky outcrops, drifts of bull dust and harsh red clay. It's a road the world's car makers use to test new products. Almost without exception, the road wins. On this stretch in 1953, Ken Tubman hit a wild pig, suffered 4 punctures and a fill of dirty fuel, but motored on through the opal town of Kupapiti with its dugout houses to Kingunya.
Adelaide, South Australia's capital. Still 11 cleanskins, among them Possum Kipling. Number 48 still going well. The public enthusiasm staggered the drivers. They'd not read a newspaper for days. How could they know that half the world was following the progress of this tough, grueling trial?
Incredibly, 11 cars made it to Adelaide, still with a clean sheet. After 5,500 miles, it was a multiple dead heat for first place. And Tubby was right in there. Adelaide turned on a hero's welcome.
A lot of the folk along the way remember 30 years ago you coming through.
Yeah, that's right, yes, yeah. There's the older ones like me, remember.
You're not so young now, with respect. I mean, it's a long drive to take on.
Yes, yeah, well, I was probably a bit doubtful whether I should be doing it, really, but as it turned out, I think I'm doing pretty well because the rest of the crew was our young fellows. They're all complaining it's too tough, and I'm coming through all right, so I haven't gone off that much, really.
I believe the only breakdown you had cost 2 and 6pence to repair.
Yeah, that's true, yes, yes.
And what kind of car was this that could endure halfway around the continent on roads that break today's vehicles with monotonous regularity? The 203 was Peugeot's first post-war car, launched in France in 1947. But the specification could have been written 30 years later. All-coil suspension, a vital Ken and the 505 strike rain, and plenty of it, right through Western Victoria. In 1953, this was a piece of cake, a leisurely touring section. For the Redex organisers had planned for a clear winner to emerge by the time the cars reached Adelaide. The route from here was supposed to be smooth bitumen all the way home via Melbourne. But the 11-car deadlock had to be resolved. The organisers announced a new horror section. The location, a secret, and the winner will be decided on the final run into Sydney.
Melbourne, graceful capital of Victoria. The control point here was in the Army Barracks, a significant tribute. Through the thronging crowd, despite the late hour of arrival, Army cyclists guided the entrance. It's a welcome typical of the entire journey, and the drivers, tired, dusty, and hungry, got new energy when they saw it. This was really worth driving 6,000 miles for. As they tore into that memorable meal, speculation was rife. Where was the horror section? No one knew. The following night brought the tense moment when the last lap began. As cars left, each navigator received a sealed envelope containing details of the horror section. Dawn, near Goulburn, and the infamous horror stretch. 11.7 miles of mystery, an almost unused road where every bump, every creek might be worse than it looked. Cars had to average 36 miles an hour. They'd lose 1 point for every quarter of a minute late at the other end. No room to pass, little room to maneuver, a dangerous nightmare journey. It was like a cross-country fox hunt without a horse, testing drivers down to the last filling in their last tooth, and cars to the first minor rattle in built-in ashtrays. This was a section that broke so many hearts. It was designed to, but the hard luck stories were legion. Wet brake linings, swamped distributors, wrong turning, stalled engines, even the lowly, humble puncture. And to our own Evangeline, not the cameraman, the car. Had she broken down, there'd have been no film. So many stalled in the deep creeks that 40 of the drivers could have formed a choir to sing One More River to Cross.
By the time we got to the Marul and horror section, we knew that the worst we could do was to come 11th. I said, righto, John, we've got 11 miles to go. How do you want me to drive the car? I don't care a bugger what you do. He said, you just bloody well go as fast as you can and do what you can.
For more than 100 miles, the road to the city was lined with cheering crowds. Journey's end, back to the point from which they started.
Ken Tubman's clean sheet had been spoiled. He lost 19 points on that section. But the next best score was Robinson's Humber Super Snipe with 20. Tubby and his Peugeot had won. After 12 days and 6,500 miles, the 1953 Redex trial was his by a mere 15 seconds.
Of course, the only person that was thought that I would win it was my mother. And she naturally, like all mums, she said, Kenny could do it. I think I was always a fellow that tried very, very hard, irrespective of if it was motorsport or tennis or whatever I took up. I was always very motivated and mad keen to do well.